Just wanted to say that we're just delighted to be here with you. What a thrill it is to come and to be able to share with you some exciting things that Jesus is doing. You know, I should have told the pastor, just tell him I'm a nail on the wall. And we're going to hang the picture of Christ there. And that's what you're going to behold today. You're going to see some amazing things that God is doing. God is up to something special. He's up to something special. And as we go through this, we're going to discover that. Let me just say that we're going to be doing another program later on this evening. I'm sure it's not going to get started at 7, but that's okay. But we're going to look at a lot of evidence. We're not going to take the time so much in this session to look at the evidence, but there's 32 years of accumulated evidence. And so we're going to look at a summary of the evidence at whenever the evening program starts, the Vesper program, whatever. After each little segment, we'll talk about Noah's Ark, we'll talk about Sodom and Gomorrah, we'll talk about the Red Sea crossing site, the Ark of the Covenant, the real Mount Sinai. We'll look at the evidence, and then we'll take a question and answer session. Do you have any questions? I mean, if nothing else, this material creates a lot of questions that folks have. And so we want to give you an opportunity to ask some questions, so that'll be later. But for right now, we want to consider what is going on with this material. Why are these things happening? What in the world is taking place here? Maybe you can sense that something special, something significant is really going on. That began back in 1977, 32 years ago, with Brother Ron Wyatt. And so we'll be sharing what God began back then, the why. Okay? Now sometimes when you're too close to something, you ever hear the expression, you know, you can't see the forest for the trees? Sometimes when you're so close to it, you don't recognize exactly what's happening until you pull back and take a collective look. That's kind of what we're going to do this afternoon. There have been several major archaeological sites that have been relocated over the last 32 years and have gained world notoriety. Of course, I've been involved for 22 years, and as the director of the site, and my wife is the webmaster, we get all kinds of emails from folks all over the world. And this material is going around the globe. It's in Chinese, it's in Russian, it's in German, it's in every language. We find it, we get emails from people in little islands out in the sea. So God is doing something significant here. We're going to be talking about Noah's Ark, Sodom and Gomorrah, pyramids. How many realize that the pyramids on the Giza Plateau is a biblical site? You know, the word pyramid means fire measures or light measures. It's not even an Egyptian word. And but yet it's most often tied, scholars have tied it, historians have tied it to Egyptian culture and tradition. It's really a biblical site. You got this crossing of the Red Sea that we're going to look at, the real Mount Sinai, the Ark of the Covenant, of course, which is probably one of the most controversial, Gethsemane and the Garden Tomb. Why are all of these archaeological sites emerging now in this generation? 22, that's right. 22 years ago, when my queen and I went to a camp meeting, we were first exposed to the research. And we knew then what you all know today. And that is that these things have been searched for by thousands of people, literally for centuries. You're aware of that, right? You're aware that thousands of people, scholars, professors, explorers, world leaders, have been looking and searching for these sites for centuries. Why didn't they find them? It wasn't the time, was it? It wasn't the time. So we know that God is up to something significant. Thousands have been looking for these things, and they came up short with virtually no physical evidence. And of course, because of that, a lot of tradition developed, a lot of traditional ideas developed. How many have heard that Noah's Ark is on top of Mount Ararat? That's tradition. The cities of the plains, under the Dead Sea. We've heard all of these traditions. Mount Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula. But you know what? All of that tradition was really kind of a blessing. You know, there are 12 different theories as to where the Ark of the Covenant is. All of that, in a way, was really a blessing. Because what it did, it preserved and protected the authentic locations until this hour, when God would call them into service. So what's going on? What did God initiate with Ron Wyatt 32 years ago? What began then? What started to happen? Because anybody would say, wait a minute, no one man is going to go over on his vacation time and find virtually everything that every scholar has been looking for centuries. They're going to say, that's humanly impossible. And they're right. But the word, the operative word, is humanly, isn't it? Because I think you can sense, and I think you'll know after this, that God is doing something incredible here. Because we know that with God, how many things are possible? All things are possible. So what's taking place is actually a supernatural event, initiated by God directly. It's not possible outside of what God can do. So something else is going on. Now, there's been a lot of controversy concerning and surrounding these sites over the years. A lot of that has come within our own church. And I know that it always saddened Ron that the church would not embrace what he knew God had specifically given to His people. Ron knew that. Now, to help illustrate what's happening here, I want to give you a little test. You see there a collection of squares on the screen. I just want you to take a second. Tell me how many squares you see collected there. How many are up there? Just real quick. Let's see if you're right. Okay, how many said 16? There's more than 16. Who has another answer? Anybody have anything more? 17. 21. 22. All right, let's take a look and see. You see what's obvious, right?
Yeah. 21.
Let's count them off. We're still going, ain't we? 30 squares. Now, this is an important illustration. And it actually can be applied to the way you think in your life, in every aspect of your life and your thinking. When you saw what was obvious, you know your mind said, I've got the answer. I'm satisfied that I have the answer. And your mind went on to something else. Okay, it was ready to go on to the next thing. But when you started looking a little bit deeper, when you started looking below the surface, you began to say, hey, there are other things below the surface. There are other things that aren't so obvious. Now that happens a lot in Bible study in general. In fact, if you were here yesterday evening with Brother Lee Forbes, he was illustrating this very concept on learning how to study the Bible. You know, we read over scriptures and we don't really understand what they mean until we start to dig. It's important to dig, right? God lays lots of gems below the surface. Well, you know what? He's done the same thing with the discoveries. A lot of people just look at what's on the surface and they say, oh, that couldn't be possible. You know, one guy finding all that, that's just absurd. You know, especially when Professor this so-and-so has been looking for this. And there have been eyewitness sightings of the Ark up on Mount Ararat. And you've heard it all before. Let's consider all 30 squares, all right? Let's consider 30 squares. What is really going on here? What is really happening here? Something beyond human intellect. Something beyond human initiative. Something special is going on here. One of the things that we noticed early on was that all of the sites involved stone in some way. Now maybe that was one of those 16 squares that you may have noticed, that everything involves stone in some way. Even the petrified remains of Noah's Ark, it's become a stone, a wooden ship that has fossilized. Now that's an important observation, and here's why. It immediately, in my mind, went to Luke 19. And here is the story of Christ riding into Jerusalem. You're all familiar with it. It's called His triumphal entry. They did this every year. The priests would go outside to one of the sheepfolds and find the Paschal lamb. And they would bring him back into the gates of the city, through one of the gates, and the people had lined the street. And when, of course, the priest came in with the lamb, they would begin to shout, wave their palm branches, throw down their cloaks, so that the priest could pass over. It was a commemoration of the Passover. Now, you're familiar with the story. Jesus comes riding through as the ceremony begins, and what happens? The people began crying out, right? They began waving the palm branches, remembering His wonderful works, shouting and praising God, throwing down their cloaks for Him to pass over. And what do the Pharisees do? They come hustling over real quick because Jesus is preempting the whole ceremony. Jesus, tell your disciples, tell the people to be quiet. And what does Jesus say? It's right here for us. Master, rebuke the disciples. And what does He say to them? I tell you that they should hold their peace. The stones would immediately cry out. What didn't the Pharisees recognize? Here they're waiting for the priest to bring the lamb, and standing right in front of them is the priest and the lamb. They failed to recognize who He was. If the people had not responded as such, the very stones would have cried out. So what's happening today? If the people had not cried out, if the people had not recognized and remembered the mighty, wonderful works He had done. You see, what were they remembering? They were remembering all of the miracles Jesus had performed. And so they knew there was something special about this rabbi. You read through the Gospel of John, the first couple of chapters, and it says that Jesus performed miracles and that the people recognized who He was and they were drawn to Him. Even a lot of the Pharisees, even though they weren't in the majority. So it was that physical evidence of the manifestation of God's power that drew them to Him. If the people had been quiet, the stones would have cried out. Now, could this be what's happening today? Could God see that it's necessary for stones to be crying out today? Why would that be necessary? Maybe for the same reason? Maybe for the same reason? Maybe the people don't really recognize the urgency of the hour? Jesus described the condition of His church at the end. He said, wait a minute. The people at the end, the church at the end, is going to be lukewarm. Lukewarm. They're going to be indifferent to their calling. They're going to be distracted from their mission. Do we see this prevalent in the church today? And I think if we're honest with ourselves, Paul says to us, examine yourselves whether you even be in the faith. It's time for self-examination, just like on the Day of Atonement, isn't it? Indifferent to their calling, distracted from their mission. Jesus goes on in the parable, Matthew 25, to tell us that all of the virgins slumbered and slept. Now let me ask you, how much praising do you do when you're sleeping? Who does praising when they're sleeping? Maybe some of you do.